The Vatican was silent. Not the ceremonial silence of holy ground, but a heavier, aching quiet, the kind that drapes itself over the walls before something ends. The sun rose behind the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, but it felt dimmer that morning. The birds perched high in the ancient cypress trees didn't sing. Even the fountains whispered softer. Pope Francis was dying. His breaths were shallow now, his voice barely a trace of its former warmth. His hands trembled. His eyes no longer followed the movement of those around him. But he was awake, and he asked for something. Not a priest, not a final speech, not a mass. He asked for him. The aides hesitated. Doctors looked at each other in confusion. They thought he was hallucinating. But his gaze was clear, parading, focused. And he repeated, "Bring Esteban, my dog." One of the cardinals blinked. "Holy Father, your dog?" Francis nodded slowly. "He's family. He needs to know I'm leaving." They didn't argue. No one had ever seen him like this, not as Pope, but as Jorge. A man, an old man who only wanted to say goodbye to his dog. The room fell still. The doctor stepped back. The protocol collapsed, because at the edge of life, titles don't matter. Only love does. And in that moment, the most powerful man in the Catholic Church was just a man waiting to say farewell to his most loyal friend. Esteban was not a famous dog. He had no Instagram page, no interviews, no papal photo shoots. He was a mutt. Short fur, uneven ears, a tail that wagged more like a rhythm than a greeting. He was the Pope's best-kept secret. Francis had met him in the Vatican gardens 6 years before, wandering thin and limping through the rose paths, a collarless survivor of Roman alleyways. Security wanted to remove him. Staff suggested animal services. But Francis had looked into the dog's eyes and said, "He knows pain. Let him stay." The next day Esteban was still there, and the next, and the next. By the end of the month he was no longer a stray. He was part of the silence, part of the walks, part of the man. They never made it public. "The world doesn't need to know everything I love," Francis once said to a trusted cardinal. "Some things are between souls." And so Esteban became his morning shadow, the quiet heartbeat beside him in moments of reflection. No barking, no tricks, just presence. He lay at the Pope's feet while he prayed. He watched as Francis scribbled in journals. He nudged his knee during hard days. He never asked for anything except to stay close. And now Esteban was waiting in the same garden where they had first met, sleeping under the olive tree they had claimed as theirs, unaware that his human was dying just a few hundred feet away. Inside the apostolic palace, clocks ticked louder than usual. Every second felt like a countdown. And in the center of it all, Pope Francis waited, eyes closed, lips slightly parted, but not yet gone. One of his aides rushed down the marble hallway, breathless, clutching a phone. "We found the dog. He's in the garden, sleeping, but safe." The doctors, the cardinals, the staff, none of them quite knew how to handle this. They had planned for papal succession, for global mourning. But no one had prepared for this, a dying pope waiting for his dog. Orders were quietly given. Barriers usually meant for diplomats were opened. The inner gates of the Vatican, so rarely touched by animals, were unlocked with trembling hands. Meanwhile, under the olive tree, Esteban stirred. Something shifted in the air. He lifted his head, sniffed the wind, and knew. He rose slowly, as if pulled by memory instead of command. The guards tried to lead him, but Esteban didn't need direction. He ran past fountains, past stained glass and shadows, through centuries of history, his paws striking the stone in rhythm with a fading heartbeat. Inside the Pope's room, the oxygen machine hummed. Francis opened his eyes and barely whispered, "He's coming." No one had told him, but he knew. The room was silent when the door opened. Everyone stood still, doctors, aides, priests. Time seemed to pause. Breaths were held, because there, padding in softly on his own, was Esteban. He paused in the doorway, tilted his head, ears twitching. Then, without hesitation, he walked straight to the bed. Pope Francis turned his head, his eyes barely able to focus. But when he saw Esteban, they glowed with something that no medication could bring: peace. The old dog rested his paws on the side of the bed, whined once, gently, like a question, like, "Are you okay?" Francis reached out his hand, trembling. Esteban moved forward and placed his muzzle under the Pope's palm, and there they stayed. A man dying, a dog simply being, and an unspoken vow being honored. A nurse wiped her eyes. One of the cardinals turned away, too moved to watch. Francis whispered, his voice barely a breath, "You kept your promise. You stayed with me till the end." He closed his eyes and smiled. Then he whispered one final request. "Don't let him go back to the street. Promise me he'll always be loved." One of the aides stepped forward, knees shaking. "He will, Holy Father. I swear to you, Esteban will have a home, always." And then Pope Francis took his final breath. Not during a mass, not with cameras flashing, but with his fingers tangled in the fur of the one soul who never cared about the hat, the power, or the history, only the man. The bells of St. Peter's rang at dawn, not in celebration, but in mourning. The world began to cry. News outlets exploded with the headline, "Pope Francis has died at 88. There were tributes from presidents, kings, imams, rabbis, monuments lit in white and gold, flags lowered, masses scheduled, pilgrimages planned. But in the Vatican, Esteban refused to move. For hours after Francis took his final breath, the old dog stayed right there, guarding the man who had once seen him not as a stray, but as a soul. And outside, beyond the walls of marble and history, the world, unknowingly, mourned not just a pope, but a love story too deep for words. The dog lay curled beside the bed, not making a sound, not accepting food, just being. One of the cardinals tried to lift him. Esteban growled softly, not in threat, but in pain. "Let him be," said the Pope's doctor. "He's mourning." Just 2 days after Pope Francis's passing, the world watched as he was laid to rest. The funeral, held in the heart of the Vatican, was solemn, sacred, and deeply human. Thousands filled St. Peter's Square. Millions watched in silence from their homes, heads bowed, hearts heavy. Heads of state, religious leaders, pilgrims, all gathered. But all eyes fell on something unexpected. There, at the edge of the platform, lay a brown dog, quiet, still, watching. Esteban, the dog no one knew about, the companion from the gardens, the one Pope Francis had asked to see with his last breath. He had not been part of the ceremony. He had not been brought forward by design. He had simply walked there, as he had done every morning beside the Pope. The cameras caught him just as the casket was lifted. Esteban stood, took 3 slow steps, then lay down again. A camera flashed. The image was shared across the world within minutes. A dog, a coffin, and a bond stronger than titles or time. The Vatican released a short statement hours later. For his final request, the Holy Father was accompanied in his final moments by his dog Esteban. May we all love with such quiet loyalty. No speeches were needed, no further explanation, because in a world that had followed Pope Francis for a decade, this was the clearest message he ever gave. In the end, love is simple, and the only thing that matters is who stays with you when you have nothing left to give. The day after the funeral, St. Peter's Square was quieter than usual. The crowds had gone. The bells no longer rang, but Esteban was still there. He lay beneath the same tree where he and Francis had once walked together. His eyes were open, but he didn't move much. He didn't chase the birds. He didn't respond to voices. He was waiting, listening, grieving. People began leaving gifts, not at the main altar, but by the garden fence, candles, flowers, childlike drawings of a pope and a dog under an olive tree, and notes. Thank you, Esteban. You were his last prayer. You showed us how to love without words. Later that day, the Vatican released a second message. Esteban will remain in the Vatican gardens, loved and cared for by those who walked beside the Holy Father. He is not just a dog. He is part of the legacy. A small space near the Pope's favorite bench was soon marked with a bronze plaque, not for show but for memory. It read, "Here they sat." One spoke to millions, the other listened to only one. Both loved in silence,